Welcome to the Careers by Jenn podcast, episode 151. Today on the podcast, Jenn talks about finding your signature strengths. It's all in the wrist, baby.
Hey, this is Jenn Swanson. Welcome to the Careers by Jenn podcast, formerly the Communication Diva podcast. This podcast is the one that helps you to get the job, to love your work, and to advance your career. And it's going to take me a while to get used to saying the new name, but I'm excited about it. The rebranding has been an adventure, and you would not have wanted to see how stressed I was this past week. I spent hours and hours trying to figure this out, and what the issue was that the files in the website were so huge that I could not move them to a new domain with the conventional methods. So I ended up talking to the company that I used to host, Bluehost, a number of times, and the people there were super helpful. And there was one in particular, and I'm sorry I don't know his name, but I talked to him at 1 a.m. my time, and I'm not sure where he was. He was somewhere in the U.S., and he had all the time in the world, and he was so sweet, and he said things to me. You know, he found out I was a career coach, and he started talking about what he liked about his job, and it was a lovely conversation, and he ended up fixing what needed to be fixed, and I was really grateful. So a shout out to the people, the support people in the tech end of Bluehost. I really appreciated that. So the website has been migrated over to Careers by Jenn, that's JENN.com. The social media is all moved to the new name, and I know that some of the links and things are not working quite right yet, but I'm working on it. And I haven't changed the Patreon page. Some of the things still say Communication Diva. If you go to communicationdiva.com, you'll be automatically redirected to Careers by Jenn. So it's been an adventure in technology. I'm learning as fast as I possibly can learn about all of this stuff. I've got people helping me, and I really appreciate your patience in this entire changeover. Another new thing that will be starting soon is a short 15-second spot near the beginning of the show that will be used to highlight a sponsor. And sponsors will be different sometimes for each show, and they are being carefully chosen to make sure that the services and products they provide are a good fit for this particular audience. We need to offset some of the costs of producing this show, the web hosting, the podcast hosting, software upgrades, etc. And so one thing I promised to do is not to fill this show with a ton of commercials, because I can't stand that. But a short spot of about 15 seconds sharing something that I think you will find interesting or useful in your life is something valuable. That's what we're going to be doing without taking away from the content of the show. So sponsorship spots will be coming soon. They'll be quick and short. They'll be deliberately chosen to be of value to you. And if you happen to have a service or a product that you think the rest of the Careers by Jenn audience might appreciate, then you can email me at info@careersbyjenn.com. That's info@careersbyjenn.com, and I'll send you more information. All right, well, today's topic is finding your signature strengths. And last month, I was co-facilitating a youth workshop that I do. I've done a number of them now. I don't know, 5 or 6 over the past few years with a local library and a local government employment services agency here called Sources BC. And we've been collaborating for a couple of years doing a workshop called Rock That Interview. And we hold it for teens and young adults. And it's honestly a whirlwind 3 hours of how to go through an interview. So what makes up a job interview? What are the components of a job interview? What are the best practices? How to answer some of the key questions that you'll be asked. And what we do is have the youth sit down through a 10-minute mock interview with an actual real live employer. So we bring in employers from some of the local industries in the town that we're in, and they actually run the students through a short, quick interview. We had something like 15 young people on a sunny Friday. It was a professional development day, so they were out of school, and yet they came in eager to learn, eager to be employees somewhere, and to be proactive about getting jobs. And in fact, I think one of them actually got hired right from her mock interview, which on occasion does happen. Well, in this workshop, we really don't have time to give the youth more than just a taste of what's involved in an actual job interview. The idea being that if they want to learn more, they will then go to the government employment office and get further help with workshops and classes and things that are offered there. But we give them a brief overview and get them practicing some of the key things. And one of the things that always seems to stump them, which is the inspiration for this show, is the activity that we do where we ask them to write out their weaknesses, their skills, and their achievements or awards that they've received. So we give them a sheet with the letters. It's 3 boxes on a sheet, and down the left-hand side there are the letters W, S, and A. And we ask them next to the W in the box to write out things that are their weaknesses, things they need to improve upon, things that they could be doing better. And then they have no trouble filling that in. They seem to not have a lot of trouble. You walk around and you watch what they're doing when you ask them to do this activity, and there doesn't seem to be too much issue with that. There also doesn't seem to be too much issue filling out the box next to the letter A, which is awards or achievements. So if they've been on the honor roll, or they've received an academic or a sports award or a citizenship award, or they have some kind of certification in something like babysitting or life-saving, or they've got their bronze medallion in the Red Cross swimming program or something. So it's or they might have Food Safe, which is a certification. I'm not sure if that's everywhere across North America, but in Canada, we have something called Food Safe, which is the training that you have to be able to work in the food service industry. So anyhow, most of the time, that section is not too much trouble. But what I noticed this last time, and I've noticed it other times as well, is that the place that gets stuck is the section with the S next to the box, and the S is for strengths. What are your strengths? And for some reason, this seems to be the hardest box to complete. And I was thinking about it as I walked around to help answer questions with the students at this last workshop that I did. Isn't that interesting? I wonder why naming our strengths is a challenge or is one of the harder things. And one theory I have is that often we're quick to criticize ourselves, and often we're quick to find fault or places that we could do better. We're our best judge, right? Our worst critic, our harshest judge. And so where is the place that we need to improve upon in our lives? Is there a skill that we lack, or something that we need to practice, or that we need to become aware of to either stop doing or start doing? And often it's not hard for us to see where we've come up short or missed the mark, or actually failed at something. We seem to be more wired to see lack than we are to see abundance. And I know that I'm generalizing wildly here, because there are some people who have no problem at all naming their strengths. But this is what I am seeing. And so I wanted to address that in this episode. And I'm not just talking today about doing this for the purposes of a job interview. Maybe you're not planning to have a job interview, but you might be heading into a performance review, one of those annual performance reviews, or you might be interested in growth and self-awareness, and this might be an exercise that can help you with goal setting for the future. So it's not just about, I'm sort of focusing on doing this in the context of going into a job interview, but that's not necessarily the case. So if even if you're not going into a job interview, you might find some of this interesting. So, strengths. It's one of those questions that almost always gets asked in a job interview and often in a performance review. What are you doing well in? What are you still working on? Which would be the reference to your weaknesses. So what our objective was with the youth was to get them thinking about how to answer that in a succinct, efficient way, and to have them do that work in advance of the interview. That's why we handed out the sheets with the little boxes, so that they don't sit there saying, and they're trying to figure out on the spot what their strengths might be and what might sound good to have, so they're madly trying to think up what the interviewer wants to hear. And so one thing I noticed was that some of the youth had no idea, and no idea where to even begin to find out the answers to fill in to that box. And I suspect that they're not alone. It's not just a thing that youth have trouble with sometimes. What I want to talk about today are not just your regular strengths either. I want to talk about those, but I want to talk about your signature strengths. What about you makes you an amazing candidate or an employee? And how do you capture that? How do you write it down so that you can confidently answer this question when you are asked it, no matter what situation you might be in? Another thing is that some people are shy. Some people are embarrassed to talk about themselves this way. It's not something they're used to doing. They don't like to talk about themselves. And so this can be a really awkward question for people to consider. Other people, again, have no problem in this department, but there are some people who would rather talk about any other thing than themselves. And for these people especially, job interviews can be excruciating. Which is why I fully recommend, and I talk about this a lot in the online How to Ace a Job Interview course that we offer on our courses page. I fully recommend that you figure all this out and that you practice it before you get anywhere near that interview room. Prepared people exhibit motivation, initiative, willingness to learn, and organizational abilities. So why wouldn't you want to be prepared or as prepared as you can possibly be going in? So I fully recommend that you do this work long before you enter into a situation where someone's going to ask you this question. The good thing about figuring out what your signature strengths are is that you don't have to figure this out alone. There's lots of help out there. And before I get to the lots of help part, I want to suggest that you start with you. You sit down, you get a piece of paper or your computer or something, and start with a few questions that I have. You can write in your journal. You can just sit and ponder these questions if you like. You can replay this interview, this podcast, replay it a few times, stop and start it between questions. But I think it's important to sit and think through and do the homework on this, because I do believe that it will pay off. So let's talk about some questions. I've got several questions to ask you just on your own before we bring in the lots of help that I was referring to. So the first one is to just think about what you are good at. And now I'm not talking about your job title or your role here. I'm talking about more specific things. I'm talking about tasks or activities. What are some things in your work or even in your non-work life, if you like, that you are good at, that come super easily to you, that come naturally to you? These are things that you enjoy and you actually look forward to doing. I know somebody who loves to make phone calls and who loves to create charts and lists and graphs of things. Maybe you are really good with numbers. Maybe numbers come super easily to you. Or maybe you love to take things apart and figure out how they work because you're curious. Maybe you have the best time dreaming up a project and then making it happen. Or maybe you adore organizing people and you're really good at delegating. So whatever it is, take time, take a few minutes to think about what you are good at, what things come super easily to you and that you enjoy doing. So that's the first one. The second thing, once you've thought about that for a while, is to think about what you do differently from others. What distinguishes you? How do you stand out in some of these things that come easily to you? How do you stand out above the crowd in some of the things that you do? And it may be that you have extra training in those things or that you have extra experience in those things. But what things do you do differently from others in what you do? The next thing is, what makes you good at what you do? Now, that's a different question. It's not the same question as what do you do differently. It's what makes you good at what you do. And some of these might overlap a little bit, and that's okay. But what makes you good at what it is that you do? What is it about you that makes that easy for you? The next question is, what qualities do you admire in yourself? And this again can be a challenging question for some people because people don't want to think this way sometimes. But what qualities do you admire about yourself? And it's okay to admire qualities about yourself. What are you proud of, in other words? And the fifth question is, what lights you up? When do you most feel alive and animated in your task or in your work? Where in your day when you're working do you feel most alive, most animated? What is getting you all fired up? And when are you in your flow state, if you know that terminology? When are you just on fire and rocking it out, if you know that terminology? So all of this is great information. And so far what we're doing is figuring out what you can see in and about yourself from your own perspective, and also to find out what you feel with this list of questions. So all of that is self-assessment, is fact-finding about yourself. So those are some things that should take a little while to figure out if you sit down with a journal and you really go through those questions. So once you've done that, you might have a list generated and you might still wonder. And it might be, and I suggest it is, a really good idea to do a few more pieces of research. But we're going to bring in some other people. So the first thing to think about here is a question about other people. And the question is, who do you admire for their qualities and strengths? Who in your circle, can be somebody you work with, somebody you have seen online, somebody that you know is a top person in your industry. It doesn't matter. It could be your next door neighbor. It could be your sister. It doesn't matter. But who do you admire for their qualities and their strengths? And I ask you to dissect that a little bit. Why do you admire this person for these qualities and strengths? And then, do you share any of these strengths? What is it about this person that resonates with you? And is it a strength that you also have? So that's just, it's a different angle to get at it with. But who do you admire for their qualities and strengths? Why do you admire these? Do you happen to share any of these strengths? And what is it that resonates with you about this person? Because other information you can get from this question is that maybe they have something that you don't quite have yet, but you would like. And that might be under your weaknesses. And weaknesses is not the best word. Sometimes it is phrased differently. Sometimes people call it areas for improvement, or sometimes it's areas that you are working on. But whatever the euphemism they use, weaknesses can also be something that you desire to develop. So your growing edge, some people call it, right? So what, and so you might discover that if you admire someone for some strength or quality that they have that you don't think you have yet, maybe that goes in there because that's something for you to work on. Another consideration when we're talking about other people is feedback. What kinds of positive feedback are you getting from others? And I emphasize positive because here we're looking for strength. So we want to pay attention to what others have said about what it is you're doing. That's good. That's positive. So from coworkers or from your supervisor, these comments and these pieces of feedback can be clues as to what your strengths are, because other people will often see things that you don't see yet. So pay attention to feedback, especially if it's repeated feedback. If somebody says the same, or different people even say the same thing to you, you're really good at public speaking, or you're really good at preparing reports, or your research was really solid on this project. Whatever it was, whatever it is, you really handled that customer with a lot of care and compassion. So whatever it is that you've done, if you hear a piece of feedback, file it away, because you might hear it again. And if you hear it more than once, that could be a clue that that's one of your strengths. Now, if you're still stuck, you've got a list. If you're still stuck after you've looked at other people that you admire and after you think about the feedback that you've got, there are several other things you can do. One of them is that there are several self-evaluation surveys and tests that you can access online, and most of them are free, to do some strength finding. And you can even just type into your search engine, you can type in strength finder tests or how to find my strengths. Type that into your search engine and you'll see loads and loads of tests and quizzes that help you and maybe suggest to you that some things might be your strengths. So you can do that. You can use the online resources that are there. You can also ask a couple of trusted friends. What am I good at? What would you say my strengths are, dear friend of mine? If you were to name my strengths, what would they be? I had to do an exercise once as part of a class I was taking where we had to email people we trusted, and we had to ask them to name what they thought our one superhero quality was. And so we had to send out an email to 10 people or something. I can't remember the details, but we had to send an email out to 10 people. And we had to ask them if they had to name one superhero quality about Jenn Swanson, what would that quality be? And, the email prefaced it by saying, I'm doing a little bit of research and I'm working on whatever it was I was working on, and I would really appreciate it if you answered this question. So it was one question. And it was interesting. One of my friends sent back that I was pathologically positive. And I probably said that before. I thought it was pretty hilarious. So one thing that happened for me was that this exercise was both humbling, and I was very humbled. I was grateful to my friends, and I found it really informative because I found out what other people thought my strengths were, and some of them I had never actually considered before. So it was a bit eye-opening in some ways. So you could do that. You could create that for yourself and ask your friends if they could do that for you. Another thing, you could ask your friends or colleagues who see you all the time. So people that you see on a regular basis and often, or people you work with that you trust, you could ask them to pay attention to when you are most animated in what you are doing and to write that down or to let you know about it. So what are you doing Do they notice when you are most excited, animated, passionate, or in your zone? When do they notice you doing that? And what do they consider to be your strengths in those situations? Can they name them for you? And that would be extremely helpful information because, again, they might see things that you haven't actually brought into your conscious awareness yet. They might see things that you have not yet seen. So that can be extremely helpful information. And if you still haven't generated a list of strengths by the time you've gone through all of that, and if you have the funds and the time, then you could also pay for some more formal testing and assessments if you want to, by way of things like the Myers-Briggs MBTI assessments, or by taking an Enneagram workshop, which is a type of it's not a personality test, but it's more got a spiritual bent to it. I found it really informative when I did workshops on the Enneagram and learned what number I was, etc. The other thing you can do if you want individual help with this is you can hire a coach to work through these exercises with you to help you figure out what your strengths are. So if you've got the time and the money to be able to do that, then that would be something that would be also very helpful. So by the time you've done all this work, some of it or all of it, you should have a list of strengths. And now what I want you to figure out is which ones are your signature strengths. So what do I mean by signature strengths? Well, what I mean is that you need to reduce the list to just a few things. You can, 4 or 5 things, top things, 3 minimum, but, I would say, okay, 3 to 5. And these are the biggest or the top strengths in your list. What are you best at out of this list? What on this list might be most desirable for the kind of work that you want to do? And which of this longer list that you've now generated, which of these align most closely with your values? Which ones did you put an extra star beside because you heard other people highlight those? Which ones have come up over and over again? So here's an example, one of my examples. I have been told that I have the gift of encouragement. And I really believe that this is one of my signature strengths because in everything I do, whether it's teaching online here at Careers by Jenn or in live workshops with some of the organizations and the organizational work that I do, or in keynote addresses that I give, or in the work that I do in leadership and ministry in my church work, in the church that I work for, I get most lit up and most excited, and I feel most alive and in the flow, in the zone, when I'm encouraging others to step into their own success. It is absolutely the best thing ever. And that's why I adore coaching and teaching and speaking, and why in my church work, the best thing for me to do is to grow leaders and to watch a nervous person who has never stood up before to read in church, or has never led a prayer, or has never given a sermon. The best thing for me to do is to be able to encourage them, give them some tools, some advice, some concrete steps, the space and the permission and the encouragement to fly, and then watch them do it. And I love that. I love to make myself obsolete because I've done my job by encouraging others to step into their own success. When I worked in healthcare and I was supervising unit clerk students, health unit coordinators or nursing unit clerks, they have different names, my favorite thing ever was to see them on their clinical experiences in the hospitals, flying around the nursing stations, multitasking, doing all the job elements. After all the months in the classroom and all the heartache of exams and learning that darn medical terminology and the evaluations and all the nervousness and uncertainty of doing the practicum, the best part of the whole thing for me was watching them succeed and watching them become the role that they had worked so hard to study and to train for. So my main signature strength is the encouragement of others, and probably the empowerment too. Because when I teach a person to do something and then I invite them to step up and try it and help them through the challenges of the learning, and then watch them do it and do it well. Well, there's absolutely nothing better for me. Now, it took me a while to figure that out, and I had to ask others, and I had to take a look at what the common thread was in all the work that I do, and that was the one that was the most common. I have other signature strengths too, but I wanted to share that particular one with you as an example of the one that is top on my list. And so you probably have one that is top on your list, and I would encourage you to think about that. Another thing I would encourage you to think about a little bit is to think outside the cliche words when you're putting down your signature strengths. So almost on every resume that I've ever seen, I've seen excellent communication and team player, those words. And I think that almost every day, all the time, people think that those things have to be there. And yes, they're important things, but they're tired old words, and people sort of gloss over them and don't really look at them anymore. And I don't think they mean much anymore unless they're demonstrated. So if these are your signature strengths, rather than just strengths, because again, they're ubiquitous. So if they are your signature strengths, then include them. But if you are excellent at communication, then I would encourage you to try to say it in a new way and be a little bit more specific. So for example, instead of putting excellent communication skills, because again, everybody has that down, put something like clear, effective, and efficient written and verbal communication skills. Yeah, it's more words. It's more real estate on your resume, but it's also more descriptive. And you're explaining more when you say, rather than excellent communication skills, you're saying that you are clear, you're effective, and you're efficient in both your written and your verbal communication skills. That says more to me anyways, as somebody reading a resume. Another example, instead of saying, I'm a team player, which again is so cliche, and it's so important. So there's a little, we need it, but I really would love to see it written differently. You could say something like collaborative and communicative strengths when working in team situations. Doesn't that sound better? Collaborative and communicative strengths when working in team situations. So it's more interesting and it's more detailed, and I don't know. I like it better than just reading I'm a team player, because everybody thinks they are. And it's not true for everyone. All right, so let's sum all this up. So firstly, know that you have strengths. Everyone does. And even if it's hard to articulate and it can feel awkward to name what you're good at, you have strengths. So it's important because you will be asked this question, no doubt. And when you know what you're good at, you can then focus your attention on improving what you're not so good at. Once you know your strengths, once you've named them and written them down somewhere, you can work on developing other skills and abilities that will further help you succeed and reach your goals, ones that you maybe haven't put your attention on because you haven't actually separated this all out. So naming your strengths and writing them down is really important. Once you've done some self-examination, you've written down what you think, then you've asked other people, right? Then you go and you ask other people. Maybe you have taken some online assessments and surveys. Maybe you've been able to pay for some assessments or testing or some one-to-one coaching. And then from the list of all the things that you have written down as strengths, you need to figure out which ones are the top ones, the top 3 to 5 strengths. Which is your signature strength? Which 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 are your top out of the whole list? Which ones are stronger than the rest? And these become your signature strengths. And when you answer that question in an interview or your annual performance review, these are the ones that you write down. And again, I want to say that this is not just for a job search. And also I want to say that our strengths do change sometimes because our interests and our experiences change as we grow and as we mature and as we learn and as we change. So you might consider that what you had written down as your signature strengths in a position that you're applying for 5 years ago might be different now. than what they were then. Some of them might be the same, but some of them might not be the same. So you can know that it's a living list, just as you are a living being. You might not be looking to do a job interview right now. You might not be facing a performance review, but I still think this is a great exercise, even just to see where you are at for yourself and to figure out where you might like to go next. It's always worth investing the time in your own self-awareness and growth. Okay, well, I hope that was helpful. That's my offering today. I thank you very much for being here. I would love to know what you think of the new branding and the look of the social media, etc. So come on over and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at Careers by Jenn, Jenn. Or come and visit the careersbyjenn.com website. If you've never visited the website, because I know a lot of people just listen to the podcast on the go, but if you've never visited the website, pop over and see what you think, and leave a comment so that I know that you've done that. That would be great. Anyhow, thank you so much. Until next time, this is Jenn Swanson wishing you a meaningful exploration of your signature strengths that the world is waiting for you to share.